Martin Lappin with Alternative Heating Solutions. And I got looking at the one video and it was a little bit confusing. This is actually the auger that feed grinder came with. And when new, it probably measured 10-inch. And it was just tight enough, chips would, even a normal sized chip would get jammed between the edge of the flight and the trough and jam the auger. So what I was using was that one on the outside. That was probably 7-inch when it was new, and it's out of an 8-inch auger. When you're looking at augers, usually the actual flighting in it is 1 inch smaller than the tube size. So an 8-inch auger is an 8-inch tube with a 7-inch flight. And if you do go with a feed grinder, you may need some new flighting. There's numerous places to get it online, and they'll ship it to you in 5-foot pieces. This is what you're normally going to get too. So you got to cut the old off of the inner tube and weld the new on. And when measuring it, of course, the diameter would be the across it, and then the pitch is the distance between a revolution. And then you need the ID of the flighting, which is the OD of the tube it's welded to. Then far as left hand or right hand, it's pretty much the same as a bolt or a wood screw. If you turn it to the right to, let's say, screw it into a piece of wood, it's right-handed, and vice versa for left hand. And that was the one that came out of the feed grinder. It went from between the hammer mill to the tank, and them little paddles would push it up so the vertical auger could pull it up and into the tank. And you've seen this before. This was just the material of the tank out of a tote, and I put that piece here so things would slide better. And I did get a longer auger in it and extend that out. I think what I need is another piece of plastic on each side yet, so it can't fall off the sides of it. We'll see what happens. I may take it right back off if it causes issues. But for the most part, as long as the chips are good and dry, it feeds them no problem, just the way it is. So this is where that one piece of 10-inch auger come out of. And it would fit tight enough here and there that a normal size wood chip would jam it. Just no clearance. When you're using it for grain or what it was intended for, it worked just fine. But wood chips are entirely different beasts. So this is a brand new piece of 7-inch flight. And it would be standard 7-inch pitch and whatever the tube size is then. The other thing I fixed, that blew out. I had a patch around it. And of course, they couldn't just use a piece of 6-inch tube. That was actually like 5 3/4. They hand rolled it and welded the seam. So it didn't fit in the cast iron housing either. So I cut several shims to put under it and put a Torque-Tite clamp. Actually 2 of them to go around there. Those are basically used on heavy truck exhausts if you need those for any reason. And we just cut the old transition out and reused it, and it turned out very well. Now, the other thing I did, you seen I made the patch there, and there it went. Got that patch. Well, it was apart. I straightened this flighting. It was bent enough that when it ran, that whole end plate flexed, which it won't last long if it does that all the time. Got some super heavy duty new flighting in it, and since it was such an oddball ID, they made that in sections, which is basically 1 revolution at a time. So it come in 3 pieces. And here's what was on. that was shot. That was just in there because I wasn't doing much. And here was the very bottom of it. Again, that wasn't doing much. So, and I'm putting these back on. I left them off. And what they were for is to make sure it unload with ground feed. Is if you had small enough screen, it just practically turns it to powder. And it packs and won't flow. Well, what I had on the one side of the grinder is it wasn't flowing. It would start to fill up and it never dropped down in the windows on this side. Because that's the side the auger feeds it from. I figured it was packing too tight right there. So we're going to put them back on just to see what happens. Quick summary of what I'd done to this feed grinder after I bought it. Had to weld the jack back on, clean the PTO shaft up, it barely slide, new chain on top, new chain and sprockets on the bottom, new screen for the hammer mill. Let's see, we made that patch on the bottom. Rebuilt the gearbox, which you can't see now, it's in there. Did away with the mineral hopper, stuck a new auger in there. Took the 10-inch flighting out of here and put a 7-inch flighting in so it'd quit jamming. And that's a 52 sprocket. I have a 40 in the shop. I'm gonna get on there, see if it runs a little faster. I think the hammer mill will handle it no problem. That tube is rotted out on the bottom. That was like a 5 3/4. The only thing I could source was a 6-inch tube. So that's got what got put back in. Torque-a-tight clamps there to hook it up. This is just the plastic out of the tanks for the totes, which I used to stack the firewood in the cages. Made that extension. That's just a block of ironwood in there for it to run on this end. Let's see. Oh, no. I added 8 foot to this auger. It was, you could use it before the way it was. You had to get a lot closer to the stove, which always made me a little nervous. That piece of tin back there, because it had something in that hopper and it was missing to make sure everything hit it. New chunk of cable on that auger. I could not source 7-inch auger tube anywhere, so I had the local welding shop roll that for me. And there's a welded seam down the top. That makes it much easier. You can hit the center of the hopper from about anywhere. So, do you have to have a feed grinder to process your wood chips? Short answer is no. If you can source chips that are a consistent size, go for it. The only advantage I have here is it's very easy to fill that hopper up with this compared to bringing another elevator up here or only filling the loader bucket one side or the other and then dumping it in. So you may be asking yourself, do I absolutely have to get a feed grinder if I'm going to run a B250? Take care of my wood chips. And the short answer is no. As long as you can find a tree service that makes a consistent sized chip, which is going to be from a hand-fed chipper, and probably something newer, you don't have to run them through a hammer mill. Now, this I get a lot of if I got an atom splitter that goes on the post hole digger for my Bobcat. When I split them down small enough to fit in my chipper, I get a lot more of that kind of stuff. Too much of that is going to cause issues. Especially, I'll show you this other pile I got from a huge chipper. Now, this stuff come from a lot in town where they're clearing to build more senior apartments, senior residents. I don't remember what they call them exactly. But these big pieces, these are going to even give my hammer mill issues. You definitely have to do something with this. This come out of a 1,000 horse Moorbark chipper. It's on tracks and even had its own grapple arm to feed itself. So yeah, if you're gonna try to avoid handling the chips any more than absolutely required, you want to get hooked up with a tree company that's using an all hand-fed chippers, and probably something newer. One I got's pretty old. This has been Martin Lappin for Alternative Heating Solutions. As always, if the women don't find you handsome, at least they can find you handy.